Well, the Havilland project really stemmed from many years of going to timber orientated seminars and talks and listening to people talking about wanting to do it in Western Australia. But the main issue was that no one ever seemed to want to make that leap into doing it. Everyone was saying, yes, it's fantastic, it's going to be a great product, and the time's right, and all this sort of stuff, and it never seemed to get beyond that. And someone had to make that leap into, and people had done some low-rise stuff in timber, and there's plenty of Class 1 timber housing in Western Australia, but there was that step into medium-rise, Class 2, multi-residential, timber. When you're looking at height and mixed use separations and things, then that was the challenge that everyone seemed a bit worried to step over. But from my own perspective, it seemed perfectly feasible to me and worth taking the risk. And although there was a perceived element of risk at the beginning, the more I learned about it, the less that risk seemed to manifest, and the more feasible and reasonable the whole approach seemed to be. And then, of course, had to take that leap into actually doing it, which was always going to be a bit of a roll of the dice, but everything played out exactly as we'd hoped. Well, not exactly. I mean, some bits were easier than others. Some bits were, interestingly, the bits we thought were going to be most complicated turned out to be the easiest, and vice versa, really.
Okay. And what were they like going in? Were you expecting things to be difficult, and what parts were the smooth parts that kind of surprised you?
Interestingly, it was working with mass timber. So we had a transfer element where between the car park and the residential. When you're mirroring things structurally, you don't need a lot of mass timber. You can just frame everything out. But when you transfer forces around the structure, you start to need the strength that mass timber can provide. And putting together the mass timber beams, which is about as close to CLT as you could get without actually being CLT. Actually we had them. I had a huge budget set aside for it, thinking, oh Christ, this is going to be a major exercise, and then plenty of time in the program as well. And by the time we had them delivered to the time we had all the mass timber beams up and bolted in place was 3 days. So it was actually the framing elements that are that much more complicated on a Class 2 building that actually took more time.
I'm really interested to hear more about the program. Before we do that, could we talk a little bit about the structure? So I think you had, I was lucky to last year go and check the project out, but you had these big, beautiful LVL beams, and there was a whole bunch of different elements you had. So you're working with different materials. So can you tell us about what elements you had throughout the building?
Well, when we say timber, it's a timber building in as much as any building is made out of one material. It never is. There's 90-something% timber, but it's about making the different types of materials work with each other and figuring out how they interact with each other. So there was an element of this building that was completely new to timber, let alone to Western Australia. And it was our core design. So we actually used steel in that context because, for various reasons. It was a lot to do with speed. When I approach this, I find when I was in the industry over the years, I'd have lots of different companies coming to me saying, you should build buildings out of timber, or you should build buildings out of CLT timber, you should build buildings out of this type of concrete and that type of concrete and these bricks and those bricks. And everyone was selling their own idea and saying the whole thing could be built out of my product because they're trying to sell their product. And I thought we need to take out that vested interest and come at it from a very objective point of view. And we needed to say, I'm not a timber guy. I'm a what is the best way to build the building guy. And it is, in my opinion, that timber is the majority of the best way to build a building. So, and that was just out of coming at it from a very cold, objective way. So when we looked at the core, it became evident pretty quickly that that's a highly complex structural part of the building. And it just so happened that it would benefit our program and various other aspects of the construction if we did that particular element in steel. But although it's only a minor part of the overall mass of the building, it enabled the timber to do other things elsewhere in the building. So we could concentrate our bracing components into the core, and that meant that we could have windows wherever we want them, or we could have open plan spaces, and we could have much more flexibility in the layouts without engineers saying, well, you've got to put a wall there and we've got to brace it, which means you can't put a doorway in it or a window or something like that. So it was about saying, right, well, we're going to use timber to maximize the efficiency and of the timber. And that's we tried to avoid block work, and wherever we could. We had a little bit of that where we were pinched for some space, literally about 4 square meters of it. And then there's obviously concrete on the ground slab. But yeah, as a general rule, we wanted to use timber, and to get the most out of it, we'd occasionally stick in the odd bit of other material here and there to make it work the best way.
Mm. And what type of program did you get compared to if you were to go with traditional concrete construction, and how fast did it all go up?
Well, look, it's a 4-story building, and obviously you know that time frames push out when you're dealing with multi-level buildings, because you cannot have that much concurrent activity when you've still got to go up. So for a 4-story building, I think you would normally expect something in the 14-month range, something like that. 12 months, I think, for a 4-story building would be pretty fast, I think, by most standards. So, you know, if we sort of said 14 months was sort of about a benchmark for a 4-story building in traditional materials, we did ours from the day we put the fence up to the day we hit PC was 10 months. And we had some commissioning and all the usual stuff, but nothing to do with timber construction. That's all, you know, mechanical and fire and all the rest of it after that for a couple of weeks or a few weeks. But in terms of the pure build process, 10 months, which I think is a 25-30% saving in the program, which is, from a developer's perspective, when you're selling product, it's not that important. It's great to have, but what it really does matter for is when you're doing commercial buildings and you're looking at rental income or hotels or anything where you're trying to generate that revenue stream as fast as possible. That's when it really does matter, and where the timber can have a serious benefit. I mean, every developer likes to get out of the ground as fast as possible, so it's nice to have. But when you're looking at revenue creation streams, then in ongoing revenue, that really matters.
So putting all the numbers together in the bigger picture, did it stack up about even in terms of the costs, you think, or come in under?
Well, again, every building's unique. I would suggest that we have come, well, I tried to sort of price the building up in a traditional methodology, as if I was doing it like that, and then applied a square meter rate that we would typically apply in for a traditional building. And I've come to the conclusion that we were 7% more cost effective than a standard build. Now, I caveat that in the sense that I would say a range of 5 to 10%. Remember, we were making mistakes and learning as we went. And looking back on it, we're going, oh, geez, we could do that a lot better next time. And so, for example, when we put all the AAC panels down on the first floor, it took us 7 days for the first floor. It took us 4 days for the next floor. It took us 3 days for the last floor. Now, if we move straight in on another job, we're doing every floor in 3 days. That's, that was a better than 50% improvement in efficiency over the course of those floors. Now, so this job, 10 months, now knowing what we know with the crews trained and all that sort of thing, we reckon we could do it in 9.
Yeah, wow.
Hit PC if we went at it. But the other issue is logistics. So with timber being the speed that it is, the construction materials logistics industry in Western Australia is geared up for traditional construction. So, suppliers don't expect to have to get gear out of their doors as fast as they do with timber. I'm literally on the phone saying, I want the next load. And they're going, really, that quickly? And they couldn't believe it. And we were saying, yes, get down here now. And I got guys screaming at me from the scaffolding going, we need more fixings. We need buckets of the damn things. So it was great fun. I love high-paced, high-energy projects. But that was a learning curve as well. So it's really about logistics. It's about the actual physical work and the guys becoming more familiar with it. Remember, we're not also sending people away and bringing them back all the time. We've got fewer numbers of trades on site. Traditional construction will have, far more different trades. And in fact, also quite often with traditional construction, you might send one load of carpenters away, only to bring another load of carpenters back in to do a completely different job because it's a different subcontract. Whereas we're doing a lot more of that amongst our team, and they're doing everything. So it gives the guys a sense of ownership because they're involved in the project from start to finish, and they can't complain about the substrate because they did it.
Yeah.
If they can't whinge about things not being level when they come in to do the next thing. And that helps as well. And the logistics, as I say, sending people away, and then a shorter program overall starts to cut down overheads and all that sort of stuff. So it has there's a snowball effect to the whole thing, which adds up to making it that much more cost effective to produce. Yeah.
And you've put in, so timber is just one of the sustainability features within the building. I understand you got solar and a few other things you might touch on, but I'm really interested to know if, is this letting you sell at a higher yield than you would for traditional construction? I mean, are people willing to pay a little bit extra at the moment for such products?
Look, even if they were, I don't want them to. I think if we're going to get sustainable construction into the mainstream, you don't want to make people part with more money for it. At the very least, it should be the same price as a standard build in terms of sustainability, which is why all the sustainability elements that I was looking for, I wanted to add elements that weren't going to add additional cost to the build. So there's a lot of other things I'd like to do. Once you start doing grey water recycling and things like that, yep, there's some additional costs there. And so I stayed away from that this time, but I would love to be able to bring more of that in when we start to get the cost efficiencies even better. But yeah, at this early stage, the idea from the outset was to say, let's get a sustainable product at no additional cost, if I can, at a lower cost. The big business, the big development end of town, fundamentally, yes, they'd like sustainability, but they're really interested in the bottom line primarily. They've got their investors and things to answer to. So to get them, and they're the people that need to push this out in a mass way. They're the ones that start to collect the money together and then spend it. We need to get them on board. And the only way to get them on board is to make it more cost effective than a standard build. Yeah. So that was one of the main goals. There were three main goals: was to do it in timber, to do it sustainably and make it the same or less cost. And then the other one was to do some difference in the product design and layout that was more architectural than anything else.
You briefly touched on one lesson learned. What else did you learn from this one, and what are you going to take into the next project?
I think the biggest lessons are going to be how to manage the logistics chain more efficiently. So I reckon there'll be additional pickups we can make if we have. So for example, there were multiple different types of fixings used on this job. What I would like to do is boil that down to a fewer number of different fixing types and then buy them in bulk and have them sitting on site in a container, literally just boxes of the things, rather than, we need to, so standardization of fixings is just one little element. There's other things that you can apply that principle to as well. So what we need to do is cut down the different types of materials and things that are being used, and then we can make that more efficient in terms of procurement and logistics of getting them to site.
And what level of prefabrication do you think is reasonable going forward?
Prefabrication really depends on the type of job. So I went in a previous role, I looked at modular construction, which is a form of prefabrication, extensive form of prefabrication. And it became evident that particular type of product was most appropriate for remote sites, logistically difficult for access sites, and sites over a certain height and under a certain height. And it only fitted those sort of criteria in terms of making it financially make sense, which in Western Australia, those categories were not as common as perhaps in other places. So modular is good in its own area, but it's not a panacea. So in this context, in prefabrication, I was looking for just, again, being brutal and cold about it and going, where is this going to work and where is it not? Now, we had a bit of a bespoke, funny shaped site, and therefore we didn't have standardized wall frames and things. So if you're doing large numbers of similarly similar designs, then you might say prefabrication is going to work. But when I've got lots of different types of wall frames that are all being logistically squeezed in around different obstacles, then it's more efficient to bespoke build it on site. In terms of the core, that is something that is definitely worth doing in a prefabricated context, because the core needs to lead the building. The way we did it is not like a normal traditional timber building where all the floors just go up one after the other. I was pinching ideas from different methodologies, and one of them was in a traditional concrete building, you lead with the core and then you build the building around it. And actually that's what we did with this. So, and in order to lead with the core, you want to get that up as fast as possible. And so therefore prefabrication is, worthwhile in that context. So prefabrication. And the other thing we did is modularize aspects of the structure. So we didn't have whole modules. It's not like modular construction, but aspects were modularized, and it sort of harks back to I did my degrees in industrial design and technology and manufacturing. So I'm looking at this from a product manufacturing angle and looking for the efficiencies and looking to trim the fat out of things, seeing where the weak spots are and adapting them to be no longer the weakest point, but stronger of the average points, and you just keep doing that all the time until you get a pretty robust process. So yeah, I think in terms of other prefabricated elements, well, I've covered wall frames and the core. That's really as much as you can do.
Love it. And it's so good to hear this project was a success. What other projects you got on the horizon, and are you going to keep looking to be pushing the boundary of innovation within WA and within Australia?
I think it's interesting. Everyone sort of said timber wouldn't work in WA, and it's all it's a brick and concrete town and all this sort of stuff. It's exactly that extreme nature of the Western Australian market that makes it the best to bring in something different, because the impact is greater. You're not just incrementally making, they already build lots of timber buildings over east. And so to bring in some elements, if we'd done those in the eastern states, they would have shrunk their shoulders and go, oh man, well, that's a good idea, that little bit that you've added there. But, we're not doing anything vastly different. But here, it's a big leap. And therefore you can have that extra impact and it's noticeable. And so this is the best place to be doing something different, in my opinion. And in terms of the future, I'm looking at, I can't go into detail as to exactly which ones they are yet, because they're not official. But there's a few different things. I have to say, I've had a look at a lot of stuff in the last couple of years, and there's still a lot of talk out there and not always a lot of action. And even sometimes when I get a group of people on a project, because it always takes a team, a lot of them will be in favor, and then it only takes one or two to chuck in some doubt and create a stumbling block, and then they're no longer going to do it out of timber. And that's happened several times. But so there is impetus amongst a lot of people to do it. We've just got to get everybody on board. In terms of what I'd like to do is roll out this timber formula on a larger scale throughout the state. And I'm looking for ways to do that. Everyone's been banging on about the build to rent stuff at the moment, and that's a bit of a groundbreaking area of the market. And I don't know, I think I must be a glutton for punishment, because I've been trying to marry up timber construction with the build to rent, as if that isn't hard enough as it is. But that's where the market is at the moment. It's in rentals. It's not so much in sales. I'm looking at some hybrid stuff. And as I said before, every building's a hybrid, but this is more like 50% timber than, and that's often the introduction of concrete and masonry is determined around fire regulations, not so much around structural requirements. It's the separation of uses. So there's one building I'm looking at where we've got some, it's food and beverage preparation areas and kitchens and things like that. The fire regulation, separation regulations are so high that and the timber works fine structurally, but to protect it under the fire regulations means you've got to do silly things that actually make it more cost effective in those contexts to do it in something like concrete. And that's not as a result of the inability of timber to cope with fire, because it's not. It's actually very, very good. It's the inability of the regulations to catch up with the performance or trust timber for what it can do. So, you know, they need to, we need to get the National Construction Code has gone a long way to accepting timber because of its performance in the other states. But there are still elements in the code that I think it's not so much to do with the National Construction Code, but also to do with other things that mean that we, you know, in some contexts, you've got to do things in concrete still, but it really shouldn't. So we need to do more. Needs to be more research, more testing, more proving of the capabilities of timber, integrate those into the regs, and then we can free up timber to live its full potential. But yeah, there's still a little bit of reticence in some of the regulations. So you end up having to do things in blockwork and concrete where you might not otherwise do.
Absolutely agree with that. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, Stuart. If people want to find out more about Bluerock and yourself, where should they go?
Well, there's my website, bluerockprojects.com.au. We're a all-round development manager and project construction delivery manager. Our background on both sides of the fence makes us a little bit unusual and a bit more efficient sometimes in the technical aspects of construction delivery for challenging projects. And then there's the project-specific website for de Havilland, which is still up and running, because although we've taken the product off the market, I've just left it up there, so there's all the information that people can see about the product, and that's dehavillandapartments.com.au, and you can get a bit more information there. But the idea is that it was really a demonstration project. I had to break the ice, so I got out there and we broke the ice and we showed that it can be done, and now we're looking for customers to come and roll out some more.